Hold on. Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to recharge as we have more exciting content to cover this afternoon. All the content from today will be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours, so don't worry if you missed something earlier. Our next panel is on funding and finance. Various government funding commitments over the last 18 months have acknowledged the need for additional investment in NHS estates. And it's also become clear that the goal of building 40 new hospitals by 2030 will cost far more than the 3.7 billion currently committed. Another consideration when looking at NHS funding is the £9 billion maintenance backlog the NHS faces. Nevertheless, there are cases where funding has been allocated, and we could look at what this has meant for estate stakeholders. I'm joined now by healthcare professionals to discuss the need for increased investment in NHS estates, which will support the government's levelling up and net zero goals too. Taking part in this conversation on the importance of finance and funding are Annette Walker, Director of Finance for Bolton NHS Foundation Trust, Dr. Kirsty Edmondson-Jones, Strategic Director of Estates and Facilities at Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospital NHS Foundation Trust. And I'm also just hearing, having just redone everything, that we've got Richard. Richard, an MP for North West Durham. Apologies, Richard, for not introducing you fully smoothly there, but we thought you weren't joining us, so we've just taken you out of everything. So welcome. And I'm going to have a little fiddle with my notes while we say hello to everybody else, because, again, I've redone all my panel notes without you, so bear with me a second. Welcome to all of you. Let's start off perhaps with Kirsty, if we may. We don't often have time on these panels to find out a bit more about the guests themselves. We normally launch straight into the questions. So while I fiddle with my notes, will you just give us a little bit of your background and who you...
Absolutely. And sorry for the long name and title. Even I struggle with that one, Helen, I have to say. I'm Kirsty Edmondson-Jones, and I work at the Doncaster and Bassetlaw Trust and have done for 5 years now. And in totality, I've worked in the NHS for about 16 years. Prior to that, I spent 7 years working in the private healthcare sector for the Priory Hospital in London. So I've had a mix of both. I've got an MSc in healthcare leadership and a doctorate in bioengineering. So I tend to sort of dabble in areas which some would think are not necessarily restricted to estates and facilities, but I would certainly argue that they are.
Oh, that's a brilliant introduction. Annette, same for you, little introduction. And also, I gather it's been a bit dramatic over the last week or so in Bolton.
Yes, thanks, Helen. Yeah, we've had our fair share of issues in Bolton just over the last 10 days with loss of heating, fire and flooding all in the space of 10 days. So it's been rather exciting in Bolton, as it always tends to be, never a dull day. So I'm Director of Finance at Bolton Foundation Trust, which is a provider of acute and community services. But I do have a special with our functions, heavily in strategic planning and risk management. I've also experienced Chief Finance Officer of Bolton CCG, and prior to that I was Director of Finance of Bolton PCT, so I'm fully Boltonised, and I've been in the NHS since I was born virtually, since university, so I haven't got the experience that Kirsty has in terms of the private sector, and I certainly haven't got a doctorate of whatever you said, which sounded extremely impressive, but that's my brief introduction, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad you've got through all the drama of the last 10 days, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. And Richard, I'm delighted that you've joined us. Give us a little bit of intro into where you fit into this piece, if you would.
Well, I think as an MP, you sort of fit in a strange way, really, because obviously you've got no direct control like Kirsty and Annette do on the sort of day-to-day side of things. But what you do have is that ability to lobby in Parliament. And certainly with both Sajid and Ed Arga, and then previously with Matt Hancock, that's exactly what MPs like me have been lobbying for. And I can guarantee you that every time there's a health questions or any form of informal meeting, actually, with MPs, health and local hospitals are one of those issues that are a perennial favourite of MPs from whatever party, and being very heavily argued for. on that sort of local level. So I think that's how MPs fit in, really. We don't have that direct control, but there are also things like yesterday I was at the Public Accounts Committee, which I sit on in Parliament, obviously asking some questions of those people in very senior leadership at NHS England and at the Department of Health and Social Care. So there's various different levers that can be brought to bear at a national level, in addition to all of that really important local work that goes on as well, because these are political priorities for the government, as was mentioned, as well as important local resources. So there's that overlap, and that's where I think MPs sort of come into play.
Well, we'll get more local as we talk to you further in the panel, Richard, because I do want to talk to you about community hospitals. But Annette, if we can start off with you, there are probably fewer stater teams around the country who wouldn't have ideas right now on how to improve their buildings. Of course, it can be really costly to do so. How do we strike that balance between innovation and budgets, do you think?
So, I mean, clearly the baseline for the NHS is quite disparate across the country. Particularly in Bolton, we've got our bid for our new hospital. So it has to be something that is affordable and because we know how it's changing all the time. So we have the innovation to be affordable, to deliver the outcome patients that need. I think also what we've suffered from in the NHS is we haven't had the funding to maintain our buildings to the standard that they should be maintained. So when we're looking at new buildings, they need to be cost effective, they need to be sustainable, etc. We do want the innovation in our buildings, but ultimately it has to be affordable. So I think previously we have seen examples where buildings are oversized and overspecified, and I don't think we're into that arena moving forward, because we know money is tight and we know we need really significant investment in the NHS moving forward. So absolutely, innovation is fantastic, but if that can drive value for money for the taxpayer, then even better. That's a win-win for us.
Kirsty, with that in mind, how important is it that NHS estates and finance teams work very closely together?
Yes, it's absolutely vital, and I agree with everything Annette's just said, and hadn't actually really appreciated we're both in competition for some of the final 8 places on the new hospital programme, so this is going to be an interesting panel in a minute. Oh, yeah. But along the lines of what you just said there, absolutely innovation is really important, and I think we're going to see that in the digital strategies that accompany the business cases for the new hospitals, and certainly in the net zero carbon agenda and decarbonising the NHS estate. But in terms of new builds, innovation is wonderful, but actually what we're looking at now is repeatability and standardisation and using modern methods of construction, because we're going to achieve excellent design in terms of operational delivery of services, standardisation and repeatability are the place to go, but also in terms of affordability, because you've got the initial procurement and then the running costs. So the way that the new hospital programme is going, in my view, is absolutely the right direction. So yes, innovation is wonderful, but let's not innovate too much because it costs money.
Richard, you were nodding away there.
Yes, no, I think one of the things I'd say is that it's quite clear to me that the government wants to deliver this building programme, and I think spoken to ministers about it. These modern methods of construction, any way to essentially ensure flexibility in some of these spaces, is incredibly important. I think both Kirsty and Annette have alluded to. One of the issues I think COVID's raised, which is quite interesting in my local area, is actually the nature of the NHS Trust and what it wants to deliver in different places, and quite interesting. That shift away from perhaps delivering some of those services at an acute hospital level and wanting to do them more in the community setting, enabling hospitals to do different things at different times because of the threat of COVID and other things. I think it's made people look in a slightly different way at that. And I think that specialisation element is incredibly important. I was very lucky to be the 40th of the 40 original hospitals up in Shotley Bridge, which got the nod, which was really good. But again, this is what I would say is that wherever you are, whatever sector you're working in, do engage at all levels, whether it's your council level or your local MPs as well. Get them fighting for your corner as well. A really important thing to have there, because it's just that pressure across the board is what you need. And But the arguments that you make really in terms of what's on the ground can just be amplified. It's not about making a different argument. And I would also say it doesn't really matter on a party political basis. This is about just getting people involved and voicing concerns, because it's what MPs across the board are quite good at doing. So do engage them, and because it's just that extra lever that is really helpful across the board to just give that bit of a shove, particularly when they're asking for things. And I think both and as you mentioned it, around specialisation, modern methods of construction, all that sort of thing. This is if MPs are seen to be open to it, not over demanding in some regards, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good, I think is the other element to it, which I think can often be the case. I had a local hospital in my patch which was downgraded back in 2000, and some services were shifted to Durham City. We're never going to get that back. MPs can often get caught in unrealistic pledges. And what I'd say to all the healthcare professionals here is also just keep your MPs on and your local councillors as well in a place where actually what you're trying to deliver is something positive for the community, because often they can get caught in political fights, and that's the most dangerous thing. And that's what really slows things up, and what really means that actually as turns that hospital building programme, you're never going to get it, because even locally they can't agree on what it is that they actually want. And if you can get people on the same page, that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's really important. And Kirsty, shall we talk new hospitals? What is the cost of your preferred way forward option for a new hospital? Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so our strategic outline case does have 5 options in there at the moment. Our preferred way forward is currently coming in at £1.3 billion for a circa 700-bedded hospital. And that is a figure that went in our expression of interest back in September. And obviously myself and Annette are waiting to hear back, I'm sure, if we've been shortlisted. And that is clearly not an insignificant amount of money. However, to give context, the level of backlog and critical infrastructure risk that's currently on this Doncaster Royal Infirmary site, to rectify to get technical here, a state code condition B and make safe is going to cost more than a new build.
Is it really?
Yeah, so the business as usual, which in business case terms used to be do nothing, is actually more expensive than the preferred way forward. And that's because of the nature of the sprawling site, because of the amount of decant facilities that would need to be put in place in order to take services and wards out, in order to refurb them to the level that would be required. So it's actually significantly more expensive than a new build just to make the place safe and to the right condition.
That's amazing. If you were successful with your bid, how quickly could you build it and decant from the current site? How long before it would be operational if it all went through?
Yeah, so our strategic driver for our new build, obviously it's all of the things that everybody that's put an expression of interest into the centre will have, which is about right sizing for the future, ensuring correct patient pathways, having correct clinical adjacencies. However, that pales to insignificance compared to our safety risks on our site. So our real driver is the poor critical infrastructure risk on our estate. So because of that, and together with the use of modern methods of construction and working in partnership side by side with our local authority in Doncaster, we've been able to put together a programme that can be delivered from the start of construction in 4.5 years. Because there's no point as being put onto a new hospital programme for a new build that's going to deliver in 10, 12, because our safety risks are so acute that we need to deliver this quickly. So it's a really accelerated and ambitious programme, but it's that ambitious for a reason. So the examples that Annette gave earlier around fire, flood, heating, these are regular, sadly far too regular occurrences at this site. And the most recent, well, it actually isn't even the most recent, it's the worst one this year, took out 50% of our women and children's hospital for over a year and is still mothballed, 50% of that hospital, and caused the evacuation of very vulnerable neonatal babies, women in labour, and children. So unfortunately no patients were harmed, but we were extremely lucky. That was a catastrophic flood and a fire. So these are very serious situations we're in some of the organisations that have put bids forward.
Gosh, do you want to add to that, Annette, and tell us where you are with your bid and what your hopes and aspirations are?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Kirsty said, actually, we talked, didn't we, about being almost in competition. I think that the fact is that there needs to be a massive programme across the whole of the NHS, because it seems like we're in really a similar situation. And it does really concern me, because I think the investment that now is needed to really catch up, as you say, actually exceeds the cost of a new build. Our project is being phased so that it keeps the value a little bit low, and I think helps with some of the operational side of a new build. So it's much lower than your value, Kirsty, but it is phased, so it's below £500 million. But definitely recognise some of the issues that you talked about, and the fact that it almost seems that because we've had to extend the life of the estate, everything seems to be coming to end of life all at the same time. And I think we are at a really critical point now, particularly with elective restoration. We can't afford services to go down. So, we had some interrupted service delivery yesterday around endoscopy and some of our other elective recovery work. And even 1 or 2 days of operational impact is not great, when 1 or 2 days makes a really significant difference to our patients who are waiting. So, yeah, I mean, I just echo what Kirsty said. And I almost think obviously we were joking about being in competition. I think the whole of the NHS needs to really look at this very seriously and think, how do we really get back on track with our estate, so that we can, that is more in the background to healthcare delivery rather than in the foreground, which is where it probably is at the moment, and putting some challenges and barriers to the delivery of healthcare that we want to achieve.
I know, Richard, we are only joshing a little bit about Annette and Kirsty being in competition, but the bottom line is they kind of are in competition. And when you hear how a new hospital can be perhaps the answer to some of the safety issues, and how building new is perhaps more financially viable than repairing old, it seems wrong that we all shouldn't be looking at the new hospitals. I know there's a limited budget, but what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a really good point. Exactly the same issues happening. I'm just going to, so Kirsty and Annette are looking at massive projects. Little Shotley Bridge is it was a £20 million project. That's a £30 million project. So it's a tiny one. It's just a small community hospital, really. It was going to have 0 beds. Now it's going to have 16 beds, etc. So we've got some of the extra facilities there. But what I'd say on all of this stuff is, I think particularly we had before the Public Accounts Committee yesterday, the new head of the elective stuff for the NHS, who was there, who's also bizarrely the head of the Northumbria NHS area, which is so it's my area as well, and he was saying, that there are massive challenges in this elective catch-up. It's a huge challenge for everyone. And it's particularly interesting to hear people say the extra costs of perhaps refurbishment. That's exactly the issue we're facing in the Shotley Bridge versus a new Shotley Bridge argument in northwest Durham. Is we're looking at a hospital which was initially built in its current form in the sort of 50s and 60s. It's been added to in the 80s. These things don't really glue together. It was designed to probably with a 30-40 year time span tops. Some of the issues I think Annette was raising there, actually, they've extended the life of some of this estate as long and as much as is practically feasible. Yet actually on a local level, one of the big arguments I made was that these guys are spending on a 30 million hospital, they're spending over £1.5 million a year on running repairs. So actually it's in terms of cost efficiency, you're looking at a 5% cost a year just on running repairs for a facility, and even on a new facility you'd be looking at 1% in terms of actual costs for that. So there's very good arguments to be made here, and I think sometimes those basic level arguments are some of the stuff that we need to put at the foreground, just to say, look, this is something which is costing an absolute fortune just to maintain a crumbling infrastructure. Surely, actually, that sort of stop and let's have a look at what we can do in the future is a better option. And I think that's going to be absolutely essential for this elective stuff that we need to get sorted, because Even with the plans the government's got, we're going to be looking at millions and millions of people, on elective waiting lists for a substantial period of time. This is not where the public want us to be. So I think that actually we should be looking more broadly, wherever possible, at some of these issues. Because I think one of the issues one of my neighbours has down in Bishop Auckland, brand new PFI hospital, underused, probably overspec'd at the time for what it was needed, and it's been incredibly expensive to the NHS, and obviously therefore to taxpayers. I think what we need to see is some of those good arguments being brought forwards on how actually we can deliver more value for money in the medium and long term. I think those arguments are quite, if those can be made, then those are arguments that I think governments find it easier to listen to, rather than that sort of occasionally what you sometimes get is an overspec'd model, which can be very tricky. I've got colleagues at the moment in certain parts of the country asking why their hospitals haven't getting the go ahead. Well, they're just asking for so much, and for so much to be put in there from day one, that it's essentially adding more long-term cost into the system. So you've got to be practical and realistic about that, and make some just very sensible arguments around the estate wherever possible as well.
And therefore, do we need to look at new and different alternative funding models, perhaps?
Absolutely. I think we need to look at a full range of funding models, but just to touch on what Richard just said there, we also need to look beyond estates as the solution. And I think Kirsty also touched on this around digital. Now, you do have to be a bit careful, because using digital exclusively does disenfranchise some of our more vulnerable communities. But we do need to look at that. So I think a number of years ago, it was around affordability. When you built a lift or a PFI building, if it was affordable, it was built. And some of these buildings were over-specified and over-engineered and oversized. And that was of a time in the past when some of those models were affordable. Now it's all around affordability and driving value for money. So it's about right sizing, getting the level of innovation that drives value for money. So I think working with a range of partners, whether it be lift or PFI, as long as that really does truly demonstrate value for money, flexibility of buildings, and building other technologies, and really future-proofing. We talk about the green agenda. That's obviously a really hot topic, and particularly for Bolton at the moment as well. I personally leading our green agenda. So I think we need to look at the full range of possibilities, and also what Richard said, absolutely essential that we work with our local politicians, with our local councils, with our universities, with our education sector across the whole range. Absolutely we need to, but it does need to be truly value for money, because I think we've all got our examples where PFI buildings are half empty, they're a millstone around our neck, and they're really expensive to run. So yes, absolutely we do need to consider alternative funding sources.
Kirsty, do you want to add, before I ask you another question, do you want to add to what Annette's just said, and also Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. I agree, Annette. I don't know what those alternative funding sources are at the moment, unfortunately, because as we know, they don't exist, because PFI is not a way forward anymore. So there doesn't appear to be another funding route, which is of great concern to us. But absolutely we need to do that. And just really agreeing and supporting what Richard said around the cost of responding to this poor estate. Because the example I gave of our Women and Children's building alone is costing us £14.4 million to rectify and respond to that incident. And that's just in 1 year. And every year we have multiple major incidents, and also increased costs of maintaining the building. And that's nothing to say of the disruption to services for our patients, and also when we divert and disrupt other local hospitals. So it is just to say it's a challenging scenario at the moment is probably a bit of an understatement, and but it's not a simple solution.
I'm guessing the other challenge you face, Kirsty, is if you're successful with the hospital, you've then got to make it affordable to run, haven't you?
Absolutely, and I think previously, and I've done this myself naively previously, you presume that when you build a new hospital, you're going to build it and it will be more efficient and potentially smaller. Whereas actually our estate is so old that it doesn't comply with any of the health technical memorandums and health building notices that it needs to. So if I give an example of an intensive care unit, it'll be twice the size of ours currently. So actually your footprint necessarily of a new build doesn't get any smaller. So that leaves you the challenge of how do you maintain, run, operate that building and make it affordable. So that does go back to kind of the I say digitisation. What I'm really talking about is the blueprint that NHSX have published very helpfully for us that are trying to take these projects forward, because that's right down to building management systems that are more smart. So they are monitoring the performance of equipment before it fails, not just alerting us when it fails. So not only is it more efficient, but you need and more effective. It's more efficient because you need less staff then to go and check that piece of equipment necessarily. And then there's the obvious stuff such as robotic cleaners and automatic vehicles for waste transportation. And you can build in a new hospital the correct size communal spaces and corridors to utilise this good technology. But as Annette and Richard, I think, have pointed out the importance of the green agenda. I'm also leading on the green agenda for this organisation, Annette. So I'm sure we're both just finalising our draft green plans. But there's real opportunities, certainly with the location we're going to put our new build, to use air, ground, water, heat source. We're going to be a fully electric build, which is cheaper to run and more effective and sustainable and efficient. So I think it really is about technology. So design standardization, absolutely, but technology is going to make it cheaper to run.
It sounds like you and Annette should probably have a cup of tea at some point, Kirsty. It sounds like you're on sort of parallel paths here. Annette, given the fact you're sort of both leading on green and everything, can the NHS afford to go green? I know we have to, and we have to achieve net zero for the planet. But where's your thinking on that? Because
I'd flip the question and say, can the NHS afford to not go green?
Yeah.
It's absolutely the right thing to do. We have absolutely no other choice. But we've all signed up to this, and it's personally, professionally, we all nobody would argue against it. I'm sure. But from a finance director's point of view, I do think going green saves money. So it's actually, for me, it's a win-win. Technologies, which in the long term should be cheaper from a running cost perspective. But I actually look at a number of projects and think actually these are cash out initiatives. So we've got actually a double benefit of going green and actually reducing waste, which in turn reduces costs. So it's perfect from a finance director's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just realised there's a couple of questions coming in. Richard, one for you from Colin. With questions over technology, i.e. hydrogen, what are the government doing to set the strategy? i.e. help these options are considered as hydrogen would be a better solution for us as a community and mental health trust with lots of smaller, older properties rather than ground and air source heat pumps, says Colin.
Yeah, no, I think all of this question actually over about making the NHS estate more sustainable, environmentally friendly, actually incredibly important. It's one of the there is a massive estate there, a huge amount of infrastructure there, which we need to improve on. There is my understanding is that, so Teesside, just down the road from me, big look at hydrogen now and how that could be used. Can we perhaps change the gas grid like we did in the 60s and 70s to run off natural gas from coal gas? There's a big look at that, whether it's a possible viable option. And I think it's something that actually, particularly in my part of the country, over the last few weeks, we had Storm Arwen, tens of thousands of properties left for over a week without electricity. Those questions are now much more to the fore, particularly when you're talking of hospitals and acute patient care. You cannot have a situation in which the hospital's electricity goes down. So actually some of that, either A, more energy efficient, but B, if it can be done on site, needs to be there. I think there's always going to be a need though for some form of backup generation. It certainly was the case in my constituency over the last few weeks and last couple of months really. So that has to be plugged into that broader picture. But no, absolutely, we need to take massive steps in that direction. And I think in lots of different areas, whether it's hydrogen or it's the electricity. We can't. One of the things I would say on hydrogen though, we do need to be careful. We have to go for properly green hydrogen. We cannot. It sounds easy, but actually there's we need to be really careful that we're not actually contributing further with some of the processes which are there to create hydrogen, which we have used in the past.
That's a whole new panel debate, which we have done in the past and we will do in the future. One more quick question I spotted, which perhaps Annette, you could kick us off on, and then we'll give the final thought to Kirsty as we're out of time almost. Martin says, does the panel feel that an independent body, possibly the CQC, be responsible for assessing non-compliances, risks and backlog maintenance in order to prioritise allocated funding base upon return on investment and cost efficiency? Sorry, the writing's so small. Rather than the NHS provider be responsible for making their case. I hope you understood that. I was struggling to read that. And then,
yes, in order to be helpful, I guess, I think that's a suggestion that actually if there's an independent review of the estate of the provider, rather than the provider saying, you know, I've got all these problems, etc. I mean, I think my initial reaction would be, you know, just adds more bureaucracy into the system, and we have quite well developed systems, I think, and standards around estate management. You know, we've got the PAM framework, which I think is now mandated, isn't it? You know, there's lots of independent assurance that we can seek around the condition of our estate rather than creating separate bodies. I think that network, that process probably needs some further development, and it needs to be very firmly on the radar nationally, which I think is where we're now trying to push this, because I think many providers up and down the country are having these problems where it is frustrating that the service delivery that they need to achieve to recover elective work from the pandemic.
Kirsty, if you want to add to that, lovely. And if you don't, I'm going to give the final word and thought to you, because I think you've got exciting times ahead, as has Annette.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I will just add to that, because I think that's a really interesting idea. Again, I'd be a little bit concerned about increasing bureaucracy, as Annette's just mentioned there. I do wonder sometimes when I'm sat in an estate that has the level of risk it has, where the joined up working is between the CQC, who is responsible for the health and safety of a hospital, but more patient focused, and the health and safety executive themselves. And in saying that I'm not suggesting I'm inviting the HSE to pay me a lovely visit and interview me under caution by any stretch of the imagination. But there are days when I wonder where the joined up working is between those legislators, because we are in a position where there are some very serious risks, and you wonder how we've got to that, I think, across the estate as a whole, not just mine.
I just noticed Laurie says, I'm not aware of the PAM framework. Can you provide links, please? So if you can pass on any.
I'm sure we can do that. That's the premises assurance model. So I don't know, did you say it was Laurie? I don't know what.
Laurie Reynolds.
Right, I don't know what your profession is, but if you're in estates and facilities, then you absolutely should know what it is and you should be on it. If you're not, then that's fine, and we'll send a link.
Oh, fantastic. You can do that via one of the team behind the scenes. Gosh, we're out of time. That flew by again. It's all going way too quickly today. Thank you very much. And I'm glad we got you, Richard. We sort of weren't sure whether you were joining us or not, so I'm glad you got there. And we didn't even talk about community hospitals, which is one thing I wanted to talk to you about. But perhaps you'll join us next time. I hope all three of us will meet again. So another brilliant panel. Thank you very much. It's really valuable to understand the effort that the healthcare sector is putting in to secure funding and what it means to them and the communities around them when successful. Right now, it's time for our last break of the day and a chance to unwind before our final panel session. This is also your last opportunity to climb the gamification leaderboard. Let's meet back at 3:10 when we'll be talking about infection prevention. I'll see you then. Thank you.